So to kick things off, what are we doing here today? The Small Business Development Center, better known as the SBDC, has been very directly involved in the pandemic response. We've mostly been working a lot on cash flow strategies and pivot strategies with thousands of small businesses. We recognize that 2020 has turned a lot of people's lives upside down, but I don't think that any single industry has been more impacted than the events industry. In particular, it's an industry that brings a lot of dollars to our communities, the resort communities specifically. It's an industry that keeps many of our crucial nonprofits afloat through big fundraising events. It's an industry that supports many of our small businesses through a variety of contracts, product placements, and often just by driving foot traffic. And most challenging, it's an industry that employs thousands of people in our Colorado communities. Many of these people are gig workers and contractors who find themselves out of work, facing tremendous unknowns about what's next with limited options to pivot and limited budgets to be able to do so. So after about 8 months of this pandemic response from our side, we noticed that it's one industry where there seems to be less of a focus in terms of the types of trainings and resources available. So we knew that this was an important conversation to have, and we wanted to take a stab at it. I call it a conversation for a reason, because we aren't going to have all of the answers today, but each of you joining us today or watching this later is an expert in the events industry, bringing your own lens of experience to the conversation. We don't unfortunately have a magic ball to see what's next, but if we know one thing, it's that this is an industry stacked with creative people and full of people who know how to handle stress and crisis, even if it normally looks very different in scope. And so for that reason, I suspect that there are amazing initiatives in the works happening already within the events industry, and we're going to talk about some of those today. However, our economic development, business support, nonprofit, and government agencies are probably just a little bit out of the loop because of the fire hose that is 2020. So we don't need to have all of the answers today in order to have a conversation. We just want to provide a platform for people to connect, to share, and to both give and receive inspiration. We know that people in this industry are hurting, feeling forgotten, and feeling disconnected, particularly those gig workers who are used to a team environment and now find themselves going it alone. So I really, really hope that you will share this recording with them and invite them into our next conversation. Let's help them feel connected. As I mentioned earlier, please feel free to blast this recording out widely. The format of these conversations is likely to shift from month to month. This month, we are talking about winter events and COVID compliance. So it's going to be a little bit more information heavy at the top of the call, but then we will open it up to questions and discussion as needed, and we'll have dedicated time at the end for that purpose. I also hope that you'll find the information a little bit more creative and inspiring than the typical type of download that we've been in this year. Future conversations might look completely different, so we are going to continue to pivot and evolve this conversation as we learn more through the end of this year and into next year. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce our MC, Lauren Chirallo. Lauren is an events planner with experience on many sides of the industry. She joined the Northwest SBDC as our program coordinator in June, and I personally have been so fortunate to work with her and to learn from her as she actively works through the pivots of 2020. So Lauren, I'm going to turn it over to you to go through our agenda and to start the conversation.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Erin, and thank you all so much for being here today. I'm excited to be involved in these calls for a couple of reasons. One, as the program coordinator for Northwest Colorado Small Business Development Center, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to help our small businesses grow, succeed, be prosper, and find the resources that they need during this difficult time. And as Erin mentioned, I also own a small business in Northwest Colorado that focuses on event planning services. So needless to say, I have felt the impact of this pandemic very personally, as it has affected my business, obviously, and then those of my friends and colleagues. So our hope with this call is to really bring to light the challenges that the businesses and individuals in our industry continue to face, discuss different perspectives that are unique, honest, and really realistic about where we're at today and where we're going to be tomorrow, and then collectively explore different innovative and creative ideas that contribute and make this industry so resilient. So with that, I am thrilled to kick off our series and this conversation with Andy Klosterman. Andy is the president and CEO of Peak Beverage. He is also a founding board member and the policy committee chairman for the Colorado Event Alliance. So Andy, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, and thank you for putting this on. I think it's very valuable for our industry, especially during this time, to come together, have conversations about how to get through this, because I think this has been the most unprecedented thing that's ever hit our industry. So for us all to work together as opposed to against one another is critical to get through this. So thank you for that opportunity. So yeah, I'll start talking a little bit about my company, I guess. My company is called Peak Beverage. We provide beverage services for events all over Colorado. We have a liquor store that we created in literally March 6th of this year was the grand opening of our liquor store. We used to be in an industrial area in Wheat Ridge. Now we're in Rhino. So part of our business model was to create a liquor store, a customer-facing liquor store for the events industry specifically, which we quickly pivoted away from during COVID to, we're selling just White Claw and Bud Light and stuff like that to stay alive right now. So that's what we're doing currently. But it is a big lifeline. I'm also on the Colorado Event Alliance as the policy committee chair. I'll share my screen real quick just to show you guys our website. So the Colorado Event Alliance it didn't exist before COVID. So once COVID hit and our industry was essentially shell-shocked in the middle of March, I remember the day, I think it was March 12th when there was an announcement that all travel to Europe was going to stop. And so that's where it became extremely real, I think, for a lot of us on how big of an effect this was going to have. So shortly after that, a couple weeks after that, the general manager of Catering by Design reached out to me, and she was creating an organization that was going to focus on the frontline employees of this industry. Because essentially, as we were canceling all of our events, we knew at the same time that all of the jobs that we were providing to these people were evaporating extremely fast. So, and there's really no outlet for them to get help. There was no organization in Colorado that could help these people. So that's how this organization was created. It started out as an organization to help frontline workers through fundraising opportunities. But as we got more into the pandemic, and this will be the main thing I'm talking about today, but as time went on, we realized that the best way, the most important way to get our frontline workers back to work was to have the industry operational again. And so I'm sure you all remember, from the middle of March till, I don't know, the end of May, we essentially were completely shut down because of the effect that COVID had. And so I had spoke with Sid, I think it was in late April, about we had started to see in our industry some people really begin to step forward, Megan Grouse, Jeremy Bronson with Occasions Catering, and try to put people together to advocate on behalf of our industry, because we really had never had an organization that represented our industry on a governmental level before. And so that's where the policy committee kind of came to be, and Sid allowed me to be the chair of that committee, just because through my own business, being in the beverage industry and the events industry, I've dealt a lot with political and regulational issues in my own business. So that's kind of how all this started. I'm gonna, and before I get into the nitty gritty, I want to make sure that there's been like a number of questions regarding like regulations. So like, can I do this? Can I do that? We get a ton of those questions to the CEA all the time. I'll answer to the best of my ability, but please feel free, if you guys do have questions, feel free to ask them, because I know there's a lot of information here and it's highly complicated, and I'll explain why. But I want to make sure I'm covering what you guys was valuable to everyone listening to the call today. So the state eventually created what's called, they're calling it the COVID dial. So the COVID dial basically is this range of COVID related criteria that says how safe is your county currently based on the level of transmission and hospitalizations and a number of other things in your county. So new cases, percent positivity, and hospitalization. So this is a map of Colorado. This is the current map, which is kept real time. And basically blue and green are good. Yellow is a level of concern. Orange is really bad, and red is the county is essentially shut down, just like we were in April and in May. So as you guys have probably already heard, the COVID data for Colorado right now is pretty frightening. The case incidences are increasing daily, pretty much in the entire United States at this point, and outside of the United States as well. So for our purposes here, I'll kind of go over this real quick. To start with, when we began the conversation with the Colorado government, our industry wasn't even known. There was no like events industry representation really happening for private events or for the type of events that we do primarily. The Hotel and Lodging Association was very involved, and we're doing a lot of stuff with them right now. But there's been a number of organizations that have been created from this pandemic. And so you'll see that the level of detail and the level of understanding on the government's behalf, you'll see on this right-hand side, and sorry, I'll try to zoom in here because it's very large or very small. But the level of detail on an industry basis is increasingly specific, and you'll see like events has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if you include the one at the top, 5 areas of the guidance area here, and that's just due to consistent communication about how events should work. So personal gathering side. So basically, one of the questions I think we get a lot is, what is a personal gathering versus an event? And so you'll see there's personal gathering at the top of this, and you'll see event down here. A personal gathering is an unregulated gathering. So that means there are no COVID regulations being put into play. There's no mask wearing, or there's no one facilitating COVID regulations. There's no one facilitating that everyone is social distancing, no one facilitating mask wearing, no one's facilitating food and beverage service. All of those criteria and protocols that are part of the event's guidance. And so under events, we have these 4 sections: indoor, outdoor, and seated and unseated. So essentially a seated event falls under the same exact capacities that a restaurant does. And sorry, can you guys see this, by the way? Is this too small?
Nope, that's great.
Okay. So basically an outdoor events are seen as safer from COVID perspective than indoor, and seated is seen as safer than unseated because there's no flow of people between groups that you have shown up with. So like if you imagine a restaurant, you go in with your family, you don't usually communicate with the other tables in the restaurant. Similarly to some events, like perhaps corporate events, are seated the whole time. So those events are seen as less COVID risky, so they have a higher capacity to them as time goes on. So please chime in if you have any questions about this, but essentially how this works is at the higher levels of risk in terms of COVID and infection rates, you have lower capacities, and those capacities grow over time if the COVID data in your county improves. So you'll see that down here. So I mean, yeah, I won't go through all the details, but that's the gist of how this operates. One thing that we're trying to advocate for right now, because unlike restaurants, our industry does not have the ability to immediately pivot when new regulations come out, is that we're asking for some type of grace period in terms of, if you've got a wedding this weekend and all of a sudden the COVID data shifts, it's not possible to unbook plane tickets or send people home, I guess, however that works out. And so there isn't a general understanding on the state. They understand that concept. I doubt there will be written words saying that we can do that. However, there is a understanding at the enforcement level that that's an issue for our industry. So I wish I could be of more help there, but it is known. Let's see, what else could I cover today? So in addition to this, I think, oh, did you have something, Lauren?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay. In addition to this, what we're doing right now and what I think is really going to be
VAIL.
critical for
No problem.
our industry is to get a lot more involved, not only now, but after COVID is over, on local and state and federal level legislation. Other industries have had representation for a very long time. Restaurants, hotels, bars. There are organizations that are regularly represented and talking to leaders in the government. And ours, I mean, we are now creating that entity. And so Live Events Coalition would be the national committee who's trying to begin on that, trying to set an organization up to connect all the state organizations. And there are many state organizations like the Colorado Event Alliance. I would say in most states, they kind of followed suit in that. But if you have the opportunity to talk to your local representative, your local senator, whoever represents your area, there's websites where you can find that information. I would highly recommend doing that. They are listening. We need to give them the opportunity to hear our story and to provide relief for our industry, both on the state level and on the federal level. Because if we're silent, which typically our industry has sort of been in the shadows by design, it's not helpful in a time like this. So whatever you guys can do in terms of that, would love to talk to anybody about that sort of thing too. So yeah, is there anything I missed?
No, that's great, Andy. A quick question for you too. So if people want to get involved with the Colorado Event Alliance, how could they do that?
Yeah, so ColoradoEventAlliance.org is our website, and I'll post it in the chat in a moment. But yeah, if you guys want to get involved, we do right now. We have a newsletter that goes out every 2 weeks or so, and then we do every 2 weeks we do a call. There's usually about a couple hundred people on these calls. People in our industry join in, and we talk about subjects. Everything from political things to regulation to tactics on contract language and just like anything that's like of major concern to us. We do surveys regularly to see what folks want to talk about. So that'd be a way to get involved. If you sign up on our website to be part of the newsletter, you'll get invites to all of those things. So that's how you would get more involved.
Perfect. Thank you. And I have one other quick question for you too. So from your peak beverage perspective and beverage catering, which is so unique, how are you reimagining bar services and beverage catering right now?
Did you mean COVID or post-COVID?
Your choice.
I mean, for COVID, yeah, I mean, we're just trying to be as safe as possible. Probably like every vendor, there's not much innovation, I would say, other than like safety innovation going on. Post-COVID, I mean, we're really trying to get people away from White Claw and I was saying earlier, like I'm selling White Claw and Bud Light right now to stay alive. Like we're trying to get people away from that, especially at events, because we think there's more time to communicate with customers, especially like you're doing a wedding or putting on a corporate event or something like that. We really want to educate people a lot more, especially on the alcohol side of an event. There's not a lot of information out there, and it's really hard to find good information about like the best products and that sort of thing. But if you know, if you took that time, and that's what this whole facility was built around here in Rhino, was to bring people in an educational perspective. But if you take the time to learn more about wine and beer and spirits, you can get things for possibly even like cheaper than you would otherwise at a higher quality. So that's really where we're trying to focus in the future is educating our customers on what we're selling.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Andy, and thank you for continuing to advocate on behalf of the entire industry. We really appreciate it. I want to remind everybody that's on the call too, we'll do a Q&A at the end, but we want this to be more of a conversation. So if you do have a question for Andy right now, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can type it into the chat and we can answer those now as well. Let's see. Okay. Andy, it doesn't look like we have any questions at the moment, but I'm sure more questions are going to come up as we move through the call. So thanks so much, Andy. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn our attention over to Emily Campbell now, who is the owner of Gobella Design and Planning and Richard's Notebook. So Emily, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me.
Of course. If you could just tell us a little bit more about Gobella Design and Planning, your experience in the events industry, and kind of what your summer and fall look like.
Sure. So my company is an event production company, and we're based in Breckenridge. And we do planning, design, and stationery. That's the Richard's Notebook portion for all of our events. And yeah, I've had it since 2002. So I've been around for quite a while. I'm the former president of our Colorado WIPA Association and one of their founding board members. And I do want to tell Andy how much I appreciate everything he's done for our industry. This summer, I was calling a lot, asking questions, and the Colorado Event Alliance was a huge help to me, more so than any other resource. So I'm really grateful, Andy, to you and everyone for helping us. Truly, truly, truly. So summer and winter, well, so this past summer, we were able to do just 3 events. Normally in a summer, my company will do 10 to 15 events, and to only do 3 was really shocking to the system. We, of course, were very busy postponing like everyone else. But I will say that the 3 events we did 2 in Eagle County. Both of them were at Larkspur. They were each around 140, 150 people. One of them was a move when Vail Resorts canceled on us about 4 weeks before the wedding. And so they ended up sharing the tent of my other clients. So they got married on Friday. We had a space on Saturday, and then on Sunday, my other clients got married who also had been postponed. So it was a lot of moving pieces, but we made it work. And I was also really grateful to Larkspur for their flexibility in how we all got through this. I know that they're a private group, and I think that sometimes that helps. But I do think it's worth noting that they were there for us, and we really appreciated it. The other one we did was in Larkspur at Spruce Mountain Ranch. It ended up being only 34 people. It was supposed to be a 175-person wedding, and they did what I now call the marry now, party later situation, which is we got them married. We had a nice dinner party. Andy's team did the alcohol for it. And then they're having their big party next year. Winter is dismal. Vail Resorts, of course, canceled all of the venues for our winter weddings. So I have one event all winter long. And it's in Palm Beach, Florida, where there's not a lot of regulation. We're able to do 140 people there. And it's a big one. It's a big wedding. And I will talk a little bit about what we're doing for that wedding to ensure health and safety for everyone. We did do their other daughter's wedding, so I'm very close with the family. And, we've talked a lot about this. I think the biggest thing that we're doing is that the family has hired a COVID testing company, and it's called the Event Doc. It was actually started by a group of people in the events community. And it's the only company that has the Abbott Lab certification to work with them. So it's the molecular testing rather than the antigen testing, which is 99% accurate. And so we're actually setting up a COVID test site at the hotel where all the guests are staying. And in order to get into any event, you have to have been tested that day. So guests are getting tested on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. They'll receive a bracelet that day to identify that they have a negative test, and they'll get their results in 15 minutes. In addition, we're doing masks for everyone. We'll be doing the social distancing, and all of the vendors will be tested every day as well. So when we talk about winter, I'm talking about one big weekend. That's all we have. And we are going to do everything we can to make sure everyone's safe and having fun at the same time. I can report back to you, but based on this summer, I learned that people are desperate to be together. And I really think that the whole mask wearing is no longer much of an issue. People are glad to wear the masks if they can see their friends, if they can continue to celebrate and perform these rites of passage that are so important to our culture and to our communities. So that's my business for summer and winter in a nutshell.
That's incredible and very innovative too. I'm excited to get your report back after your Palm Beach wedding and hear how that went. And also, so what's your perspective on kind of cultural norms? I know you kind of touched on that a little bit earlier. How do you feel that that's going to change in the short term and then the long term as well?
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly from the summer until now, people's attitudes about masks, I think, is drastically different. Even living in Breckenridge, where we ended up putting ordinances up, signs up around our town that within this territory, you have to have a mask or you will be fined. From seeing how the tourists received that at the beginning of the summer towards the end, and how the businesses responded to people either coming into their shops with their masks on or not, the issues sort of dissipated. And so what that's telling to me, and including myself, is now when I go out, everyone wears a mask. You don't have a choice, you're going to get a fine, but we've just become used to it. You know, even with my teenagers, they're used to it. So one thing I've learned from the summer where we had 3 events and we had no COVID cases, was that if people wear their masks and if we socially distance, there's a very good chance we can celebrate safely. And I'm actually quite a big advocate for this, because I feel like for the events industry, we have no choice. I mean, this is our livelihood. So we have to advocate for what we know works. And I know this is a short testing period to say this absolutely works or it doesn't, but the science is there now to show, even with flights, if people wear their masks, the likelihood of spreading coronavirus is very, 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 very low. And so with that said, I think our events industry is in a place where if we can continue to advocate for doing events safely, that perhaps so many of my peers won't be losing their livelihood. Instead of shutting us down, let us do this safely. And with the cultural norms, I think the masks are fine. And I do think that in the future, we're going to see a change in how we greet each other. I don't see handshaking coming back anytime soon. I mean, I love to hug people. I miss hugging people, but I just think the way that we interface with each other will be a little bit more at a distance, but we're getting used to it. The bottom line is people want to be able to earn an income. They want to be able to socialize, and they want to be healthy. So those are the 3 criteria I think we're looking for in our cultural norms as they're getting established.
I love that. I love celebrate safely. I think that's a great phrase that we can all use moving forward. One last question for you. What's your perspective on how event professionals are feeling right now? Do you feel it's a state of hopelessness, more optimistic, or one of our favorite terms in the event industry right now, is it a hybrid of those emotions?
Well, I'm sure it's a hybrid. And it really depends on who you talk to. I mean, I have some friends, especially in New York, that, you know, the sky is falling, and I think it actually might be. And that's sort of how they live their life. And then Others, I think in Colorado, there's a lot of us who are more optimistic. I think it's going to be a really big challenge for people who have started in the industry relatively soon, like people whose businesses are only 1, 2, 3 years old. They may be struggling and a little bit more scared than people like myself who have been in the industry over 20 years, because hopefully we have the financial security to sort of get through this, and also the innovation to figure out ways to make money until we can actually do our jobs full scale again. But yeah, I would say it's a hybrid, but I mean, I'm not going to lie, it's not optimistic. It's not. It's scary, and I actually see a lot of my friends. I talk to a lot of my friends who are starting to lose the heart to continue on. It's just constantly feeling like you're getting, kicked. And I remember one point in the, I guess, late spring, I said to my husband, I said, I'm starting to not find the joy right now because I've always loved my job. And he pointed out to me, he's like, Emily, because what you do is, you create this beautiful event and it's lovely and everyone has a great time and it's a success. And right now, all you're doing is dealing with problems, and you're not getting that reward of having the event and seeing the people happy, which is what makes me happy. So when I talk about some of my friends, including myself, sometimes like questioning where your heart is, like, where's the heart to keep on going? I think that's where a lot of people are. I hope that our industry does well, but I'm a realist, and I know that without aid from our government at this point, and some sort of policy that will allow us to do our jobs in some capacity, the future is not going to be great in the short term. But I do think by this summer we'll be back to doing events on a pretty good scale now that we know about the vaccine coming out in spring. Fingers crossed.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your honest responses too, Emily. We really appreciate it. Does anybody have a question for Emily at this point in time? Or you can put it in the chat too.
One thing that Emily had talked about is, safely reopening. When we were talking with Senator Bennett, he was saying, everyone's asking about, like, can this industry open up? Can this industry, operate again? And he said, that's the wrong question. It's how. Like, how does this industry open up? And that's the question that we all need to be focusing on answering. So that's a big thing to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, this summer when the governor's office came out with a requirement for live music to have 25 feet of distance between the performers and the audience, this happened like a week or two before my event. I was like, whoa, how are we going to put the band 25 feet away from the dancers? And so through the Colorado Event Alliance, I was working with the governor's office and Mannequin, the band, and we came up with a plexiglass system that they actually created and installed for both of my weddings that weekend. And again, it was just, we can do it. We are such smart, innovative people. If you just give us a minute, we can figure it out. Like, that's probably what we're best at doing. We're like the best problem solvers on the planet. There's a lot of jokes about that, about our government too. Like, why are event planners out there, like, counting the ballots? But so I think that's just an example of what Andy was saying. If we have the opportunity to show what we can do, and if you tell us the science of what needs to happen, then we can help figure out the solutions on how to make these events as safe as possible.
I want to say a quick pitch there, because I think you just brought up such an important point that as somebody who works more on the government and the business side of things, people are spinning about how to put on events, how to do this. And so for those who work in the events industry and they're looking for a way to earn back contracts or get involved or go back to work, I really think that events can be flipped right now. And instead of waiting for the contracts to come to you, to go out and say, I have an idea about how we can achieve this. I have an idea about how we can still do your nonprofit fundraiser. and bring money in for your organization in an entirely different way. And people are just so tired and overwhelmed right now that they need people coming to them with those ideas and those solutions, instead of, stacking problems on problems, which is what we're having to deal with a lot on the government and other sides of the industries. So thank you for bringing that up.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, if you look at our world holistically and you say, wow, the weight is so heavy right now, but there are so many innovative people, especially in the events community, that if given the opportunity, and maybe we need to fight for the opportunity, and as Andy's been trying to do, to say this is what we can do. And if you want to have a discussion, here's 10 options. I mean, that's what we're good at doing. And focusing on solution rather than stacking on the problems is always a good idea.
Thank you. That's amazing. I love this shift. And again, it goes back to the resiliency of our industry too. So Emily, thank you so much for your candid responses. That means a lot on this conversation. Any other questions for Emily at this point in time? Great. Well, I am also excited to introduce our team from the Viceroy Snowmass. We have Danielle McNair on the line, who is their Director of National Accounts. And then we also have Katie DeBesh, who is their Director of Catering. So welcome, ladies. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for being here. So we'll start with you, Danielle. If you can just tell us a little bit more about your role at the Viceroy, and then if you're seeing groups booking events this winter.
For myself, I handle all of our group accounts over 10 rooms, and that covers the gamut of corporate, association, incentive. We have quite a bit of continuing education contracts that we hold throughout the year. So my department would be, as it is now, I could say national, but I handle everything group comes to my desk. We're an intimate team, and we cover it all.
That's great. And then are you seeing groups book for December, January, or do you have more groups booked for later this winter?
No, I am seeing, like in the past couple weeks, the leads are coming through. We're seeing quite a few for 2021, but the majority are summer and then on to 2022. They're smaller. I have seen some programs, even I have one out there for 30 to 50 rooms per night in January, but nothing's moving. So that's kind of the tick with some of our winter business. Now, unfortunately, we had 3 for us in the winter. Our winters are pretty full with group historic repeats and conferences and events, mainly continuing education programs. And we had that happens usually about the 2nd to 3rd week in January, and all 3 of those programs did cancel. But what we're doing is in turn turning it around and offering friends and family for the same attendees that have been coming to our destination for years, and coming and encouraging them to come out for a ski vacation. And we're seeing pickup. Unfortunately, the first program in January, we're not seeing pickup. They had quite a few of the doctors book and then cancel. So I think that was just, as we're seeing the surge through Colorado and the rest of the states, that unfortunately, I believe, came from that. But we still have quite a bit of groups coming our last 2 weeks of January, and they're still booking. So that is encouraging to see. And these are medical professionals that are booking. So that also gives us some more hope. And if they're comfortable coming out and making a ski vacation, I hope others will do the same.
That's a really good point. That's a good group to have kind of kick off the winter too. So tell us a little bit about your relationship and partnership with Pitkin County. I know you attended that call this morning with the Pitkin County Public Health team, preparing businesses for stricter regulations and restrictions that might be coming into place soon. But I know you and the Viceroy work really closely with them. If you can just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Town Hall today was to give an update to Pitkin. And for us in all of the business that I work with, every day is a resource to go onto the county and see where we're at, and I encourage my clients to do the same. And because they want updates, and I know it's different from every county throughout our state. A lot of times when we see, it snows on a Broncos game and everybody thinks it's snowing in the mountains, they see news from Colorado and they think it applies to everybody. So we really rely heavily on Pitkin County and the information coming from our county in particular to relay that to our guests and to our clients versus kind of the state organizations, because they are so unique county to county.
Great. I know you shared some information with me too about what the Viceroy is putting out from a guest perspective. So if you could just tell us a little bit too about your COVID-19 health and safety plan, kind of the signage, the guest facing materials that people and groups are seeing when they come on site.
Oh, thank you. And I know we're seeing this throughout businesses all over the state. For us, we, as a company, as well as an entity within Snowmass, have what we call our promise of cleanliness. And we took that throughout every department in the hotel. And we go into details based on what department that may be, front desk, lobby, and other areas, just to create, a sense of ease and comfort and security for our guests. And then we can, one thing that the guests see is that sticker. So for instance, you'll of course see it as you come in to our property, but on each of our rooms, you'll see that it has been closed when our housekeeping staff has left the room. And that's the promise of cleanliness as they enter their room and they feel it's comfortable as their kind of new home while they're staying with us at the Viceroy. But I think that for us and for our guests, really taking the time to outline it was important. We also, realized that we have to be flexible and we change as we see what the customer's needs are. An example could be the valet. Our guests want valet. At first, we're like, don't get in their cars. But then we realize when we show up, the guests are like, park my car. So we have to make sure as, oh gosh, how many months is it now? It feels like 2 years that we've been in this, but that we all kind of grow and learn together in this cleanliness and safety and what people are comfortable with and what they want. We started so high level and we're really trying to tailor it to, make people feel comfortable, but also give them, a sense of like they're at home where it isn't, there isn't so many restrictions that they can't feel safe in our community.
That's wonderful. That's great that you guys are working so closely with the county too, to implement those policies and procedures. So thank you so much, Danielle. I really appreciate it. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here and would love to turn it over to Katie as well as the Viceroy. Maybe Katie, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, how your summer and fall looked, and then we can dive into the fun conversation that we all know and love, which is food.
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate everyone's time this afternoon. I know everyone's busy, but a lot is going on. So I do appreciate everyone taking the time. I think, as Andy mentioned, everyone kind of feels like they're on their own island and by themselves in this situation. And it does help to be able to everyone come together and kind of collaborate with ideas, best practices, and just, as an industry for us to move forward. So I've been with the Viceroy for 11.5 years. I helped open the hotel. I was actually in Breckenridge before that. So Emily, I love Breckenridge. It was nice to see you out of that location. But, I think going back to, the resources and everything, and communication with Pitkin County, what I did find is with all of my brides or any of the event planners, they came to me with all of the questions. And so I learned very quickly that I needed to become a resource. And rather than just saying, let me find that out, each morning I would get in and find out where we are with COVID, where we are with restrictions. I did numerous walkthroughs with the Pickens County Health of the property, both from the room side as well as the event side, just so that I could become a resource that they felt comfortable. And I do feel like that helped us have a somewhat, I'm going to say this, a COVID successful wedding season. So, we ended up with 16 weddings for this summer, which, surprised me. Some were already on the books and we just had to pare them down in size. Some of them came last minute. I booked one within 10 days for a 30-person wedding. Just people, like you said, I think it was mentioned earlier, to get married now and party later. So, with a number of different directions from Pickens County, also an amazing team on the Viceroy side to implement all of those safety measures, I do feel like we are able to offer a number of different events successfully and safely. Thankfully, I can say that we did not have any COVID cases coming out of any of our events. That was, a concern of mine, is to have, one of my events take place, because I have to be the one that signs off on all of the events when it comes to Pickens County Health and getting those, getting the license for each of those events. And so it would have come back to me. So there is that even level of anxiety of, even though I feel like the event went well, for the next 2 weeks, I wait to hear if anyone got sick, whether it was on behalf of the event or something like that. So that was just another stress level that, as everyone mentioned, event planners, that we do stress. This is what we do. But that was a new one for me for sure.
Wow, I didn't realize that. So every license, you were the person that was authorizing it and responsible for it.
Yes.
Back to the county.
Yeah. So, and that was what Andy mentioned at the beginning, is the difference between just those social gatherings where it's just an informal gathering versus an actual licensed event. And so with that licensed event, basically I was the one that was signing off on it from the hotel side, that we were following all of the restrictions, that all of our staff were taking temperatures, wearing masks, following all of the safety protocol that was put into place by the county. And that then we were holding the guests responsible as well for wearing masks and following all of those guidelines. I will say also, to Emily's point, is my very first event, it was a wedding out of Texas. And they wanted nothing to do with masks at all. We actually had a physical altercation. The cops were called twice. It was a whole thing. But in the end, it went off safely. Everyone, got themselves together and everyone wore masks. But, that was my first kind of event, which was a bit of a shock. And then after that, every single event from there on, everyone became much more, just very used to wearing masks and very understanding that it wasn't us that was putting those regulations in place. It was the state and the county, and that we were just there to keep them safe, and then also to keep our staff safe. So that was also very important.
That's a quick transition too over the year too. I'm glad to hear that everything went well with the altercation. So from a food and beverage perspective, Katie, what are you doing to reimagine that food and beverage experience at the Viceroy?
So we've taken a few different steps. Our summer, all of our corporate groups canceled. And so we didn't really have any true traditional meetings or meeting sets that we had to work through. It was mostly social and weddings. So for example, you would typically be hand passing appetizers for an event, and that just isn't an option. And so what we did is we would set up food stations. So this kind of speaks to buffets, like our buffet is actually going to be a thing in the future. What we did is we put a really nice, beautiful display of food. We would have plexiglass up, and then the guests would come and we'd have staff there, and the guests would pick what they want. The staff would plate it and then hand it to the guest, so that there was no contact, there was no sharing of utensils. It still did present very, very nice, somewhat formal experience for the guests, but in a very safe way. So I do feel like that was a good way to kind of transition. And then looking into the winter and the groups that we do still have, I think box lunches, box breakfasts, I think those are just going to be, those grab and go items are going to be much more prevalent. And so working with the culinary team to rethink what a box lunch looks like. It's not just a sandwich that's wrapped in saran wrap and, your pasta salad and a cookie and an apple. What can we do to elevate what those grab and go lunches look like, so that then again, the guest is feeling like they're getting the level of service and the level of experience that they're expecting, but we're doing it in a safe way, so that then we feel comfortable with it. And then we are a sustainable hotel. We're LEED Gold certified. So then another balance is how do we, all of these little products. So you're individually wrapping all of these items now. And I think that everyone's finding this, is how do we do that in a way that's, you know, going to be sustainable in the future.
You bring up a really good point. I think that's a point that everybody's been talking about. You know, we're using all these single-use plastics now, where everyone was trying to go in the opposite direction of that for so long and trying to move into the compostable timeframe. Have you found that to be an easy transition to move into still composting and keeping those green standards, or has it been a struggle?
It can be easy, but it's expensive. And that's the challenge is, you know, we can get all of these compostable materials, and we do compost, and we have that facility and within our facility as it already stood. But you have your price point that you would typically have for your for a menu item, you know, then you're having to add all this additional cost. Do you pass that on to the client? Do you just decide that you're just going to, you know, eat that cost for the duration until we can get back to a little bit more normal? You know, those are things that we've had to balance as we go into the winter, and also, you know, as we put new menus together and pricing those out. So while it's an easy solution, it's not a cheap solution. So, you know, being creative and what does that look like?
It's a really good point. And then from a dining perspective too, have you noticed, I've heard of trends that people are going to start doing staggered dinner times for their groups, where they can all use the same venue and experience the same things at the dinner or whatever event that they're going to be doing, but then staggering those. Is that something that you're seeing come through as well?
Is. Yeah, so we're talking about doing, you know, kind of basically 2 different seating periods, and then, you know, after the first one, going and doing a full clean. And then doing a second one. We are also fortunate that we have a couple of different indoor locations where we can host the same event in 2 different locations. And so, you know, basically just recreating them in 2 different spots. So I do find that that has been a good solution for some of the groups moving forward. We did have one wedding, and I'm going to speak to this as kind of just what we wanted to do, is this bride was not willing to go to 50 guests. In Pitkin County, we were limited to 50 guests all through October. So what we ended up doing is we hosted the ceremony in a location for 50 guests and a reception for 50 guests. And then a separate location, we had a full reception taking place for the remainder of her guests, the remainder of 50. And we broadcast all of it into that second location through our partner with PSAB. And so they really kind of felt, I wasn't sure how it was going to go. I mean, this was new to me. But I think it was successful. They were so happy, and all of the guests that were in that second location, they still got to be there and enjoy, you know, the time, but everyone stayed safe and healthy. Not ideal. I said that I hope I never have to do that again. But we were going to be doing it for the medical conferences this winter. So, you know, it's that creative, you know, trying to figure out a way to meet the needs. So, you know, for the bride, the need was she still wanted all of her guests to be there. They didn't have to be in the same room. She just wanted them to be there. They had already purchased flights. So we did what we could to meet those needs. For the medical conferences, the needs are, they have to get their CMEs. So do they fly, and, you know, they get to enjoy their ski day, because that's the whole point of a CME in the winter in the mountains. But then do we broadcast the general session so that they can pull it up on their individual device in their guest room, so that, again, they're getting the CME, they're achieving their goal, they're still getting to go out and ski, but they're doing it in a safe way that achieves everyone's goals.
That's incredible. I love that innovation. That's exactly what we need. Well, thanks so much, Katie and Danielle. Does anyone have any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask any questions for Katie, Danielle, or Andy, Emily, or any of our panelists at this time. We'd love to hear from everyone on the call, or anyone on the call. And I can also pose a question out to the group if anybody, our panelists, you're welcome to answer it, or anybody from the audience is welcome to answer that as well. Basically, do you see medical advisors? I know that Emily's doing their wedding down in Florida with that group there doing COVID testing, but do you think medical advisors and COVID compliance managers are going to be on site at events moving forward, not only in the near future, but do you think that that's going to be a trend that we see in events coming up for the next few years, just knowing now how much we know about respiratory illnesses?
I definitely see it for the near future. I mean, when she mentioned that, it sparked my interest in, having the liability is really where we're at for corporate. It's not as there, of course, when we talk about our social events, but corporate concern of hosting events and how they can continue to have these with a pandemic and with the rates being so high throughout the state. So having that compliance there, potentially having a company that can offer those rapid tests could change the game for us. And I hope it's not forever, because I'm really over all this. I hope we meet in a year from now and we're like, whew, man, we learned so much. Let's not do that again.
Do it. November 12th, 2021. It's on the calendar.
Let's do it.
I do think that COVID testing is going to be the norm. I think, probably within this year, for the next year, as vaccines continue to get spread, starting in the spring. But that I'm kind of wondering if maybe we don't have COVID testing into next summer and fall, maybe even to next winter. And hopefully it will be a lot more affordable than what it is now. I mean, I have to believe it will be, just because they'll be able to produce those tests at that time. But yeah, I definitely think for the next year or so we're gonna be seeing it, and also from the liability standpoint, as event producers and venues, the liability on us is pretty scary. So it's nice to have that extra reassurance.
Great point.
I know I was on a meeting, we were meeting with the music industry and our industry, and the hotel folks were on the call as well. And we were talking about rapid testing as a possibility of opening events. And what I'll tell you is the state does not like those. They think that the accuracy level of those is in the 75 to 80% range. I don't know if that's true or not, but so that was the concern that I heard last week. So I don't know if there's going to change
I can
anything.
speak to that a little bit.
Okay.
So there's basically two types of testing. There's the molecular and there's the antigen.
Yeah.
The molecular is currently the EventDoc, which is the company I'm using. They're currently the only lab allowed to or have received certification to use this, which is considered the gold standard for testing. It has 99% accuracy on testing results. Now, the thing I learned with the antigen testing is that it depends on who the maker is of that specific antigen test. Certain different brands have different levels of reliability, and it also comes down to how the test is administered. And so when you're looking at different testing companies, because I did interview a couple, what I found out was, is there an MD who's supervising the testing site? Because the other one that I was looking at are the test samples being taken off site and then evaluated, or are they being tested on site? Meaning, is the culture actually going to be tested on site? And the key is that the sooner that you do the test, the more accurate it will be. And yesterday I was speaking with my testing company, and there is a shortage currently on the molecular tests. We're still trying to get them for our January event. If we have to get the antigen test, the accuracy.
I think we lost you.
On site, it increases to almost 99% as well. So, I think a lot of it comes down to the testing company, the lab that you choose to work with as to the rate of accurate testing.
That's great information,
Yeah,
Emily.
I'm talking with the state right now just to get an update on that, because it looks like they just bought a whole bunch, 1.7 million tests from Abbott Labs recently.
Those are considered the gold standard, Abbott Labs.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, I will say, I mean, on the other side of the state conversation, my money right now is on the vaccine. As you probably all have heard, Pfizer had like a 90% effectiveness rate on the vaccine in their initial results, which were 98 people. So I was reading somewhere earlier it needed to be 53 or something like that. But anyways, the conversation we're having right now with the state is how does the vaccine release like function, and how does that affect like what we're calling like a permanent reopening? So like how does this all end essentially? And so right now we're trying to build out that framework. The state's working on the guidelines, and instinctually you would think the guidelines would be like, you know, at this percentage of population vaccinated, you can, you know, open up to this degree or whatever. But the reality is, and the argument we're trying to make is that the problem with COVID is not necessarily everybody getting it. Like getting it doesn't actually hurt anything. It's people becoming seriously ill or dying from the disease that is the main problem. And so there's a section, if you can target the vaccine in the populations that are most likely to become severely ill or die first, for example, the effect of a vaccine is a lot more powerful in the overall economy if those types of populations are targeted first. So that's what we're trying to have a conversation on right now, and we're working with a few other organizations like that I had mentioned to do that.
That's great. That's great information. Thank you both so much for sharing your feedback and insight on this. Sorry, guys, I know we're running a couple minutes late over our call time, but thank you all. I just want to thank everyone for being on this call today. I think we shared some great information. I have a few resources here as well that we will share with the group. So the COVID dial, as Andy talked about, the social distancing space calculator, as well as Colorado Event Alliance website, and a few others, Viceroy Health Plan. And then right now, we're actually a few minutes late. I know Colorado Event Alliance is doing an expert holiday series. It's $15 donation. I think you learn how to make a pizza and learn how to use or make the most of your iPhone. I think if I got that right. And then they're also doing, as Andy mentioned, their industry update call on the 18th. Our next call in this series will be on December 10th. Yeah, well, thank you all so much for joining us today. Andy, Emily, Danielle, Katie, really appreciate your time today and all of your thoughtful and insightful comments and tips and tools.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.